Okay, I'm going to read a little bit, and then we'll move forward. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now, the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing the large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread, so that these people may eat?" He said this to test them, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." I think they're probably making fragments. We got leftovers, but they did. From the 5 barley loaves left those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. I thought I heard the piano. What? Oh. So we've seen these pictures before. We already did that. So we talked about the importance of the miracle, that it was done in front of so many people, and that it was a miracle of creation, not restoration. But the most important thing is that it's a picture of Christ. Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus is the one that sustains us. Jesus is the one that saves us. He is the Passover lamb, and so they and we do this at communion, and we commemorate, right, his death and resurrection with communion. And he is the Passover lamb. So it's a picture of Christ. And then the occasion of the miracle was during a time of rest. That's not really important. And so we went through these lessons already, and I don't think this is anywhere near the most important part of this. So now, this is, I think, important because all of us go through trying times. All of us go through trials. And all of us, at some point, say something like, "What are you doing?" Or "Why me?" And we all have times when we don't get what God is doing. It doesn't make sense. But the thing is that Jesus is with us the whole time. One of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis is that God whispers to us in our rejoicing, and he He doesn't yell. He says, I can't remember the word he uses, but he speaks. He speaks strongly. He speaks loudly in our pain. And what that means isn't that he's yelling at you. It means that he is present with you in that pain. And we need to remember that whatever that pain is, he's there. He's right there. And he understands um, uh, hardship and betrayal and anything that we have ever gone through. Yes. Quickly. Um, yeah, so his trials test our faith. Failure is looking at outward circumstances rather than God's power over those circumstances. And we tend to do that. I tend to do that. That I have a trial or I have something I can't figure out or something that's bothering me. And I'm looking at that thing. And I'm like, I can't do this. I would want to, why? What is it? And instead of saying, Lord, I need your help. Help me in this. And he will. It doesn't mean everything is going to go away right away, but he is present in that time. And that's when we need him the most. And I'm not going to knock on Philip and Andrew because uh, it would have been odd if they said, well, why don't you just make food? They didn't have any filter to understand that. So even with all the miracles he had done, they couldn't have um, thought of or expected Jesus to make food out of nothing. So let's talk about the miracle. It reveals Christ's sovereignty. What does it mean to be sovereign?
Has like lordship or power.
Yeah, and Jesus has all power, right? God has all power. We call kings and queens sovereigns. I am very interested. Well, I was very interested in the British monarch when it was Queen Elizabeth. Not so enamored with her son Charles. Um, and she was called the sovereign, right? And she now it was a constitutional government, so the king or queen of England in these days doesn't have a lot of actual power. They have a lot of have a lot of sway, and the people adore them generally. But in a true monarchy, that sovereign is the only voice, and so it reveals Christ's sovereignty that He is King, that He can do whatever He wants to do. Thankfully for us, what He does for us is good. So He has them sit down, and they start distributing, and lo and behold, there's enough for everyone, and there are even leftovers. And so when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Now you remember when we talked about earlier in the year about that prophet from the Old Testament is Messiah. So that's basically what they're saying. This is the Messiah, and they were right. But it required obedience from his disciples. If his disciples would have said, "I'm not doing that," then they would have never even gotten the bread, right? Um, and uh, and that's a good word for us. When God tells us to do something, and we know the things that God has told us. I'm not saying when God tells us, like, you're going to hear this voice that says, Tobin, you need to go to here for college. That's not what it's like. It's I've never heard the obverse of voice of God, but many times, and this is what so this is just what I assume. If something comes into my mind, into my head, that is sane, well, maybe not always, but and I have no idea where that came from. Like, I wasn't thinking about it. It was just all of a sudden it's this person on my mind. I pray for that person because I assume that God put that person on my mind. And there are times when I'll give you an example. Lane came to Cornerstone in 7th grade, and it was supposed to be just for 7th and 8th grade. That was it. And then he was going to go to Bellevue West and play basketball. And I was even teaching at the school, and I was going to send him to Bellevue West. And he in the summers he'd been with the Bellevue West teams and all that. And then Lane told us, I want to go to Cornerstone. And I, in all my wit and wisdom, said, your father and I will make the decision. And I wrestled with that for quite a long time. And I went to a meeting that was for families who were going to have, high schoolers the next year, or were maybe going to go to high school. And the only reason I went to that meeting was because I didn't want to upset Dr. Schraub. That's just literally the only reason I went. And I'm sitting there and I'm hearing Mr. Hubert speak, and our then PE teacher speak, and then another male teacher speak. And the thought that came into my mind out of nowhere was this: how can I not want these godly men to be the men that are speaking into my son's life? And I literally kind of went, where'd that come? And I told my husband, Lane's supposed to go to college. And indeed he did. And he was a leader. And listen, if nothing, in his faith group, he was on the mission, not on the mission, he was on the worship team. I didn't even know he could sing. He can, but I didn't even know. And I believe with all my heart that Lane would not be who he is if not for Cornerstone. Now, I became his teacher, which he didn't like at first, but it ended up even bringing us closer. And all because I obeyed, and it was God. Lane was right all the time. It was God leading Lane and leading me to the right answer. So I had to obey, right? And Lane had to obey. Now, this one is also not as important. God is a God of order. We see that even in his creation, right? The moon, the sun, the stars, everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. And the sun isn't going to careen out of place, because not only did he create it to work well, but he sustains it as well. So God is a God of order, but I'm not sure that's the most important. And then, okay, this is way more important. It shows Christ's omnipotency. omnipotence. He is God. He can do whatever he wants. And God can take the weakest things and use them for his purposes and for his glory. Think of Moses' rod, what God did with that, or David's sling and what God did with that. And he can take little things and make them powerful. Even um, even the most what are even the lives of people like you. Don't ever think that God can't use you. He can, and He will if you let Him. We have the privilege of joining God with what He is doing, and there is um, no thing that is as meaningful um, as that. And then we see the blessings that come from serving. I come from a family that gets engaged. My parents were engaged. Every church we went to, and I think I've told you this already, but I moved every 1.8 years on average, my entire childhood, all over the planet, from Korea to Brussels and all across the United States. And so we were constantly moving and constantly going, and sometimes in the middle of the year moving. That's the hardest one. And finding new friends and finding new churches and finding all of that. And everywhere we went, my parents got engaged in a church, and they were serving in that church. And that had such an impact on my sister. And we have done the same thing with our families. And we have learned the blessing that comes from serving. I taught Bible study, wrote and taught Bible studies for 16 years. I was an Awana leader for decades. And even after my children were no longer Awana age. And I've gone on mission trips with my church. And this is a mission, right? I'm teaching teenagers. And I'm going to tell you the truth. This is the best gig I've ever had. I loved going to Zambia 3 times. But I would be there for a week and a half, and then come home. And I get to be on mission every day. And I can't even imagine, I can't even explain to you the joy and the pleasure it is to do that. Yeah, I get a little upset at kids sometimes, but I love you guys and all of my students, and um, it's just such a privilege to do that. And I hope someday you learn that. Maybe you already have. And then it reveals Christ's sufficiency, that He is so He is sufficient. Um, he is all that we need. Well, there's nothing more we need than Jesus. It reveals His sufficiency. He can do it. He is um, He is sufficient. My God will provide all your needs according to His riches and glory. Is what it says. Now, I'm going to show you a couple. I'm going to stop with these two slides, but the feeding of the 5,000. So what you see there is it's tiles, and that's a basket that was used. What we're going to do is compare and contrast the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. Okay, so so the feeding of the 5,000 is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all four, right? And this particular basket was called a kophanos. It was a larger basket. No, it was a smaller basket. I should read that. Hang on. Oh, I can't find it. But anyway, and so this kophanos was a Jewish basket, and they had 2 fish and 5 loaves, and they had 12 baskets remaining. And then the feeding of the 4,000, which is not in John, and we won't go through, but you already know about it, is in Matthew 15 and Mark 8, and this is called a spurus. It's a handled one. I think that one's the bigger one. And it says that he had a few fish, so they didn't give a number, and 7 loaves, and they had 7 baskets remaining. And So we don't know for sure because it doesn't. We know it's on the Sea of Galilee, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, but it, the feeding of the 5,000 was on the Jewish side of the sea. So that other basket, the kophanos, would have been a Jewish basket. And it would have been that kind of basket that the leftovers were put into. And then the feeding of the 4,000 was likely on the other side, on the eastern side, and it would have been in Gentile territory. And this was a Gentile basket. So the feeding of the 5,000 showed Christ's sufficiency for the Jews, that Christ came to the Jews and came for the Jews. But the feeding of the 4,000 tells us that he is sufficient for the Gentiles as well, for the whole world, that he came for everyone, not just the Jews. And yeah, he is the Savior of the world, not just the Jews. He is the Savior of the Jews, but not just the Jews. Okay, so we're going to stop there because we're done with this part. We're going to pick up with the miracle of walking on the water tomorrow. Hopefully we can get that done tomorrow and take the quiz.